Okay, be honest. Have you ever met someone and suddenly they are absolutely all you can think about? I mean, picture this. You're checking your phone every 30 seconds. You feel that agonizing physical jolt in your chest every single time the screen lights up, only to feel totally crushed when you realize it's just, a food delivery notification. You're replaying every tiny, microscopic interaction in your head, and it feels like your entire mood for the day, basically your whole sense of well-being, is completely dictated by whether or not this specific person messages you back. It's painful, it's all-consuming, and honestly, it leaves you feeling entirely out of control.
Well, welcome to today's explainer. If that opening scenario sounded a little too familiar, I want to reassure you right out of the gate, you are not just dealing with a regular crush. Today, we're going to be scientifically dismantling a very specific, very intense phenomenon. We're going to explore exactly why our brains sometimes just completely hijack our common sense and turn a simple, harmless attraction into a debilitating obsession. We are breaking down the chemical architecture of what psychologists actually call limerence.
Okay, let's dive into this and map out how we're going to deconstruct this chaotic emotional loop step by step. We'll be covering beyond a regular crush, the addicted brain, the crystallization trap, the power of uncertainty, your psychological wiring, and finally, escaping the limerent loop.
Starting right off with Section 1, Beyond a Regular Crush, Defining Limerence.
So the term we're focusing on is limerence. Now, this isn't just some internet buzzword, right? It was actually coined by psychologist Dr. Dorothy Tennov to describe a very specific, all-consuming state of romantic infatuation. And I really want to emphasize one word here: involuntary. You do not choose to enter this state. It is a wild, totally unpredictable ride filled with intensely intrusive thoughts, staggering emotional highs when you get even a tiny crumb of attention, and profound gut-wrenching despair when you feel ignored. The absolute most crucial point here is this: if you felt this way, you aren't crazy. You are experiencing a highly documented, very real psychological state.
Let's move into Section 2, the addicted brain, the engine of obsession.
Now, what's genuinely fascinating is the direct biological comparison we see happening here. When researchers put people who report being madly in love into an fMRI scanner, their brain scans look remarkably similar to someone suffering from a severe chemical addiction. Your brain is literally not processing this as a gentle, sweet romance. It's processing it as an absolute do-or-die survival need, functioning almost exactly like a substance dependency. So here is the actual plumbing, the exact physical mechanism at play. When you just look at a photo of your person, who, by the way, psychology refers to clinically as the Limerent Object, your brain's reward system completely lights up. Specifically, this region called the ventral tegmental area, or the VTA, activates. And get this, that is the exact same area of the brain that responds to hard drugs like cocaine. When the VTA fires, it floods your entire system with dopamine. This doesn't just make you feel happy. It creates a fierce, almost aggressive energy and an intense, laser-like focus strictly directed at that one person.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real-world fallout of that dopamine rush. Because you're essentially getting a chemical high every single time you think about them, your brain naturally wants to think about them all the time. In fact, people experiencing limerence can spend a staggering 85% to 100% of their waking hours obsessing over the limerent object. Think about that for a second. Your daily waking hours are literally being hijacked by these chemical highs and looping thoughts. It's exhausting. Which brings us to Section 3, the crystallization trap, the filter.
Once that dopamine is flowing, your brain kicks off a fascinating, kind of deceptive process called crystallization. This concept actually comes from the writer Stendhal, and it's just a beautifully vivid metaphor. He compared this psychological process to taking a plain, bare twig and throwing it down into a deep salt mine. When you pull that twig out months later, it is no longer bare. It's completely covered in beautiful, shimmering crystals that make it look like a dazzling diamond. Well, in limerence, your mind does exactly this to the person you are fixated on. You project absolute, sparkling perfection onto a highly flawed human being. You can immediately see how this builds into a stark contrast in your daily life. The real person, they might be incredibly flawed, a terrible texter, or completely emotionally unavailable. But through that lens of crystallization, you project a shimmering aura of perfection right over them. The big takeaway here is that you aren't really falling for the real person at all. You are falling for your own constructed, bedazzled image of them. This perfectly explains why your friends are entirely baffled, asking things like, "I don't get it. What do you even see in them?" while you are sitting there convinced this person is literally a deity walking on Earth.
Let's look at Section 4, the power of uncertainty, the fuel.
For limerence to truly thrive and just take over your entire life, it requires one primary secret ingredient: uncertainty. Think of this as the slot machine effect. Look, if you played a slot machine and it paid out exactly $1 every single time you pulled the lever, you'd get bored incredibly fast, right? It's predictable. But because a slot machine only pays out occasionally and entirely unpredictably, your brain gets hooked. You keep pulling the lever, hoping the next time is the jackpot. In psychology, this highly addictive mechanism is known as intermittent reinforcement. In the context of dating and relationships, intermittent reinforcement takes the shape of some pretty toxic behaviors. Limerence absolutely requires a volatile mix of hope and doubt to survive. It thrives on things like breadcrumbing, when a person ignores you for 4 days, leaving you in total despair, and then suddenly, ping, they drop a sweet, complimentary text out of absolutely nowhere. These toxic behaviors act exactly like that unpredictable slot machine payout. They pour gasoline directly onto the fire of your obsession.
Moving on to Section 5, your psychological wiring, the vulnerability.
Now you might be wondering, why me? Well, research indicates that our underlying psychological wiring plays a massive role here. People who have an anxious attachment style are significantly more prone to experiencing high levels of limerence. Furthermore, if you grew up in an environment where you constantly felt like you had to work for love or really earn basic affection, your brain gets literally wired to view love as a struggle. So when you encounter someone who runs hot and cold, your brain essentially says, I recognize this. This exhausting, painful chase feels deeply familiar. Therefore, it must be love. Your past puts you right onto this psychological hamster wheel, totally priming you for the trap. And in some really intense cases, limerence can heavily overlap with relationship OCD or ROCD. This involves experiencing repetitive, intrusive doubts or preoccupations specifically centered around your relationship. It is an agonizing, looping thought process. When limerence pairs up with this kind of obsessive-compulsive loop, it makes it nearly impossible to just logic your way out of it or simply tell yourself to let the obsession go, because your brain is caught in a rigid, repetitive cycle of anxiety and desperate relief-seeking.
Finally, let's get into Section 6, escaping the limerent loop, the prognosis.
First, I want you to look at this timeline. Limerence is not some modern curse brought on by texting and dating apps. It is a historically, deeply human experience. We see it way back in the 1300s with the poet Dante's legendary obsession with Beatrice. We see it in the 1590s driving the tragic, reckless intensity of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. But here is the most important thing: the light at the end of the tunnel. Science tells us that limerence has an expiration date. The typical lifespan of this specific chemical state is usually between 18 months and 3 years. I know, it feels like a literal eternity when you're in the thick of it, but the fever does eventually break.
I want to leave you with this core takeaway from the source material. If you are currently stuck in the limerent loop, read this and really let it sink in. You aren't crazy. You aren't fundamentally broken. Your brain is simply functioning exactly the way a human brain functions when exposed to a very potent, perfectly mixed cocktail of dopamine, intermittent reinforcement, and deep-seated psychological vulnerabilities. Just knowing this is the absolute key to offering yourself some profound self-compassion.
So I want to leave you with a question to chew on. Looking back at your own life and your past crushes, which ones were actual, genuine, healthy connections, and which ones were actually just the limerent loop in disguise? It's a really powerful thing to reflect on. If you found this breakdown of the research eye-opening, make sure you join us for our next explainer. We're going to be diving into the hidden triggers of human attraction, exploring the one invisible factor that almost nobody talks about. You absolutely will not want to miss it. See you then!